A stunning arrest at the U.S.-Mexican border. A group of men trying to enter our country illegally, and the way they did it raises horrific questions about what they were planning to do once they got here. Let's take a look.
March 14th, 9:45 p.m. A white van coming from Mexico is stopped at the U.S. border, filled with illegal immigrants trying to sneak into the country. But they aren't hiding in the trunk or under a blanket. These 13 illegal aliens are disguised as U.S. Marines, and they aren't alone. They are being led into this country by 3 American citizens. Even though all the men are wearing Marine uniforms and their van has a government license plate, the group is busted by Border Patrol. An alert agent, a former Marine himself, becomes suspicious when the passengers can't answer basic questions that any soldier would know. Who are these men? How did they get a U.S. military vehicle and uniforms? And what were they planning?
Kendall Coffey is a former United States attorney, and Asa Hutchinson is a former undersecretary for Border and Transportation Security for the Department of Homeland Security, and also former U.S. attorney as well. Welcome to both of you. All right, gentlemen, it now turns out that the van was not a government van, that it had altered, stolen government plates on it. And it turns out that this Border Patrol agent asked a question of the driver of the van that every Marine should know. And Kendall, I'll start with you. Do you know what that question was?
Well, apparently the question was, what is the date of birth of the Marines? It's the first question that any real Marine learns, and it's the last thing that a fake Marine would be able to come up with. So just like that, this elaborate and frankly very troubling scheme fell apart.
All right. And it turns out that the date of the birth of the Marines is something that's beaten into everyone at boot camp. And it's apparently November 10th, 1775, for those of you who are guessing. All right. They're also, Kendall, interestingly enough, one of the guys says, or the Border Patrol guy says, and everybody give me a hoorah. And everybody looks straight ahead in the van. One person says hoorah, and they don't respond, which clearly is an indication they're not Marines. Asa, I'll go to you. What are the other things that raise the antennas of this Border Patrol agent?
Well, Judge, it was excellent law enforcement work, very observant. The tags were government tags, but they'd been altered, and the light that shone on it did not show that they did not reflect appropriately. And then later they asked where they were headed, and they said they were Marines. They were going to the Joint Services Base. Well, the Joint Services Base does not exist.
Well, yeah, and it shows the power of questioning. I mean, there were things like a whole bunch of them had name tags that said Perez, and then as they continued, they saw that, you know, the haircuts were certainly not Marine regulation haircuts. But one of the things that concerns me is that the driver was initially approached to smuggle drugs, and he decided not to, but instead agreed to smuggle illegal aliens instead. He is then taken to Mexico to meet with the coordinator in charge of human smuggling. Kendall, what does that tell you?
Well, it tells you something very frightening, and that is the same people who smuggle drugs smuggle people. And that has a lot of very troubling ramifications, not the least of which is that for the undocumented immigrant, they are often at the hands of an utter criminal.
Well, also, I think that, you know, what it tells us is that, Asa, wouldn't you say that it's a kind of a complicated operation, that if they're actually taken to Mexico to meet with the coordinator of human smuggling, what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that it's a sophisticated organization, criminal enterprise, that has different business units. One business unit for immigrant smuggling, another business unit for drug smuggling, and this individual had his option as to which one he wanted to participate in.
But how do you think these guys got these Marine uniforms, the rank, the insignias? I mean, where did they get this stuff from? This isn't easy to come by. I'll start with you, Kendall.
Well, you sense that they had some contact. I'm sure it wasn't a Marine, because a Marine would have never let this befuddled and amateurish an operation go forward. These guys were there's a little bit of Keystone Cops to it.
You know, this investigation is very important to help answer some of those questions, but regrettably they can steal those things, uniforms, license plates as well.
And Asa, I'll stay with you. 10 of the 13 illegals were sent back to Mexico. Was that the right thing to do here?
Well, the prosecutor should have his discretion in these things. If it's a first time being apprehended crossing the border, usually they're sent back. The second time, they can be prosecuted for it. I wouldn't dispute sending the rest back. Obviously, they come back again, second time, make sure they're prosecuted then.
Whether or not they're repeat offenders, I mean, why does that matter? If these guys are wearing the uniform of the United States, Asa, it seems to me that they're not just a regular guy crossing the border or, just hoping to get a job, mowing your lawn. They're going the next level. What do you think? The 10 of those 13, should they have been returned to Mexico?
I don't think so. I think that this was a much more serious and troubling situation than just the ordinary case, because you've got people in the uniforms of the United States, and that means that it's much more elaborate, as you were just describing, but also consider this, Judge. People in uniform, military or police, are exploiting the respect and the trust that those uniforms command, which means that the public is much more exposed if it turns out that that uniform is being worn by a criminal imposter. So I think all the folks in this one ought to be hammered to the full limits of the law.
And you know what, Asa, I'm going to go back to you on this because you were the Undersecretary for Border and Transportation Security for DHS, the first, as I understand it. You know better than most that there are something like 375,000 illegals who come across the border every year. To give these guys a pass when they should have been taken in as material witnesses, and when we know it's a bigger, more complicated operation, aren't we just throwing up our hands in surrender here?
Well, a couple of points. If it's the facts as you described them, they probably should be prosecuted. But the fact is they were probably being brought in a smuggling operation, and the prosecutor goes after the most responsible individuals, which are the U.S. citizens that were leading this smuggling operation. If you incarcerated everyone that tried to come across the border, you're going to bankrupt the taxpayers.
But you know what?
And
with
so
all
you
due
have to
respect,
use some judgment and discretion.
Asa, with all due respect, I was a DA. I ran an office in a major metropolitan area. When you've got people who are crossing the border illegally, and as Kendall says, just the very fact that they're carrying this insignia of the Marines and impersonating Marines, you got a double whammy there. And then you've got a human smuggling operation where they're going to Mexico, getting the vehicle, being trained. I mean, why would you give these guys up until you had an absolute conviction? Why are we throwing our hands up?
You shouldn't throw your hands up. You've got to get a conviction. You've got to get the smuggling organization. You hope you could lead yourself to the top.
All right. I want to thank you both for being here. Two very impressive guests, Asa Hutchinson and Kendall Coffey. Thank you so much.